Fawn Weaver, welcome to Biscuits and Jam.
Thank you for having me. I love biscuits and jam. Literally, I love biscuits and jam.
You're not the first to say that, so I think, we got the name right. So, Fawn, we're in the podcast studios here, and we just got the little nickel tour of the test kitchens. What'd you think?
I think it's amazing. I think that I would have a hard time here because I'm such a grazer. So I would get such a small amount of work done because I'd constantly graze through the kitchens to make sure I didn't miss something that came up. So, yeah, this location would be a problem for me.
Yeah, if you're a grazer, it's, it can be a little bit addictive being up here.
I could see that.
Well, Fawn, congrats on the book.
Thank you.
It's called Love and Whiskey, and it's really fantastic. It's an incredible story. And I believe I'm correct in saying that it just became a New York Times bestseller. Is that right?
It did. First week out.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You must be so excited about that.
I am. I'm so incredibly proud of the book, but also all of the messages I'm getting that are it's just transformative for people. Southerners sending me messages and saying, I'm proud to be from the South again. That means a lot to me. And so, yeah, it's been an incredible book.
Well, I can't wait to dig into that. And I want to start out by asking you about the photograph that's on the cover.
Yes.
Because so much of this book really kind of stems from that photograph. There's so much that you kind of took away from that, and in a lot of ways it kind of instigated your journey here. But tell me a little bit about that picture, if you can just sort of describe it.
Yeah.
And why it meant so much.
So the photo that's on the cover of the book is the same photo that was on the cover of the New York Times International Edition, is where I was in Singapore, and it was the cover of the New York Times International Edition. Here, I think it was the cover of the food section. It is a photo of Jack Daniel with his leadership team. And the reason why the photo went a little crazy is because, one, the headline that accompanied it, but also because you're looking at a photograph in which pretty much everyone is white, and then you have an African-American man sitting to the right of Jack Daniel. That image is cropped, however. When you actually get Love and Whiskey, the very beginning of the book, I show the full photo. And in the full photo, this young man, which is Nearest Green's son, George Green, Nearest Green, first African-American master distiller, that's what we now know. So this is his son sitting next to Jack Daniel. Well, it's not just that he's sitting to the right of him. Jack actually ceded the center position of the entire photo to him. And if you look really closely at Jack, every person in the photo is sitting except for Jack. Jack never grew to be more than 5'2". And what people don't know, and they can't tell, but because I have all of the hospital records and things of that nature, is Jack's right leg was amputated. So he is actually on a cane on his right hand. And where the people are positioned where George Green is positioned is to cover the fact that Jack is, one, standing, and that, two, he doesn't have a right leg. When it first began going around the internet, it was very negative because the headline of the story said, Jack Daniels embraces a hidden ingredient, help from a slave. Very quickly, the internet, without any other context or information, came to the conclusion that Jack Daniel was a slave owner, that he stole the recipe, he hid the slave. That was everyone's conclusion, and that story went wild. It spread like wildfire. There was absolutely no truth to it. I'm looking at this photo and saying, if in the 19th century, or now we know it was taken in circa 1904, but in the 19th century, around that time, if you did not want to give credit to a black man, you did not put him in the photo. And if you put him in the photo, you put him in the outskirts. You're not centering him in the photo right next to you. So while the entire world was reading this story and saying, oh, it's another story of how black people were stolen from in this country and how something was built on the back, I'm looking at this and going, no. This is different. This story has to be different because he's in this photo and he's there prominently. So that means that Jack was trying to make sure he could not be forgotten. So let's find out why. So I approached the story from a completely different standpoint than the entire world was approaching the story. I wanted to know, why did Jack want to make sure that we did not forget who this man was? what was the significance of this man, that he would make sure that the only photograph that he ever took ever with his team, he ceded the center position to the black man.
Yeah, this is not a photo that would have been thrown together at the last minute. I mean, there was a lot of thought and a lot of planning that went into this.
Yes, this was not selfie time.
Yeah.
This was not, it took a second. This was, you planned this for a very long time to have a photograph taken in 1904. You're absolutely right. There was nothing quick about this.
Yeah. So it is really incredible that one of the most successful products, one of the most successful brands ever was really originated by an enslaved person. Is that something that you knew? Did you know that story or anything about it before you encountered this?
Well, here's the thing. I don't think it was originated. So what we're looking at it's a couple of different things. Number one, people give nearest the credit for the recipe. Almost everyone in Lynchburg was using the same recipe. There were 16 distilleries in a 4-mile radius. Everyone was using variations of the same recipe. It's not the recipe. The difference in the distinguishment between Tennessee whiskey and Kentucky bourbon, both are a straight bourbon whiskey. By legal definition, they're both bourbon. But the difference, other than location, is a process called the Lincoln County process. It takes a traditional bourbon distillate and you run it through sugar maple charcoal before it goes in the barrel to filter out fusel oils, the different things that give you headaches if you drink. That's the stuff it's taking out before it goes into the barrel. And that process, Jack and his descendants were very clear in going on the record and saying that process came in with the enslaved people. So it's that particular process that made the difference. It's that process that is why Jack Daniel, when he was alive, it wasn't just that he made great Tennessee whiskey. His bourbon was named the best in the world, and it was. And so when you're looking at the time frame in which Nearest Green was making that bourbon, it was the best in the world. And that process is what made it that way.
So really, he was a mentor to Jack Daniel in teaching him how to use this process and how to perfect this process.
Yeah, but he was, we have to go back a little further than that, because to understand this story, you have to understand Jack's story a little bit. Jack was the 10th child, and his mother contracted typhus fever when he was 4 months old. 7 days later, she was dead. So he's the 10th child, and now his father has 10 children, including a 4-month-old. So Jack is being wet nursed by his next door neighbor. And you have men at that time where their way of raising kids was to marry another woman. So he went very quickly, his father went very quickly to marrying another woman. Well, that woman never took to Jack. So by the time Jack was young, right now, we would never put a child in the field at 6 years old to work, 7 years old to work. Back then, if your hands worked and your feet worked, you were doing something. And so very early on, all those kids were doing some kind of work around the farm. That's just how you did it. And very young age, 7 years old, the stepmom just did not get along with him. So Jack goes and begins working as a chore boy at a farm up the road from where they lived. And that means he's going out getting water from the well for the family, milking cows, feeding slop to the pigs. Like, this is not a privileged kid. And then in the Civil War, he becomes an orphan. During this window of time, Nearest Green is the master distiller on the property that he goes to work for. So both Nearest and Jack work for the same man.
Gotcha.
And that's how they meet. But then you have Nearest that becomes a mentor, a teacher, and a friend. And neither one of them are in a privileged position. So their friendship is forged out of adversity.
Mm. And in terms of age difference, I know the birthdays are a little tricky, but do you have an idea of what the age difference might have been?
We have no idea, because if you look at me, I think no one would ever guess that I'm knocking on 50 years old. Listen, God blessed Black people. I'm going to tell you that much. We age very quickly, meaning until we're about 25, we're 15 and we look like we're 25. But then we get to 25 and we just stop. Like, we stop and we don't age again until we're somewhere around 60. So you have a person. Remember, Black people were in slave rolls. Their names weren't even listed, right, for a very long time. Then finally, their names are listed in the 1870 census for the very first time. So you have these white census takers going around asking Black people who can't read or write and don't have birth certificates, how old are you? They don't know. So then the census taker is guessing. So there is literally he is born in 1820 according to one census. And then the next census, which is 10 years later, he's born in 1834. So it's not a small gap. And so all we can do is sort of back our way into trying to figure it out, but we have no idea. The only other indication that we have is the fact that he was called uncle. The significance in Lynchburg with the term uncle was that wasn't a term of endearment. In Lynchburg, you didn't have many people calling people aunt. It was really just uncle. And the three most respected men in Lynchburg were Uncle Nearest, Uncle Jack, Uncle Felix. Uncle Felix is his wife is who actually wet nursed Jack. Mm-hmm. So you have these three men who are really the most respected, and all of them are referenced as uncle. But we have no idea when they began being referenced as that. And so we don't know.
So you're just reading clues and the research continues.
Doing the best we can. Doing the best we can, yeah.
Well, Fawn, I want to come back to that story in a second, but I want to take a minute and just talk about your story, which is also incredible. And you grew up in California.
Yes.
You did not have an ordinary childhood, I think, to say the least.
No.
And there's a line in the book that I stopped cold on, which is, I grew up listening to Smokey Robinson and Stevie Wonder tell stories at my parents' kitchen table.
Mm-hmm. They were Uncle Stevie, Uncle Smokey. Absolutely. But here's the thing is that people always assume that if celebrities are around, there's wealth, there's power, there's influence. The year that I was born, my father decided not to renew his contract with Berry Gordy, with Motown Records. And he had been making a lot of money at a glass house on the top of Hollywood Hills. And then instantly, he now doesn't have money. He's got stuff, like fancy cars, but no money to put gas in the cars. Will Smith has a similar story, ironically, where you've got all these fancy cars, but then you don't have money for the gas. And that was my father. And so they couldn't afford to live where they lived anymore, but they were starting off with a nice house, so they could downgrade to another house, but it would still be a very nice house. And so I grew up in a beautiful home in Pasadena, California, but we didn't really have anything outside of the home. And meaning we had that real estate, but there wasn't a whole lot more. There wasn't money. There wasn't spare anything. And so the juxtaposition of people thinking you have power, thinking you have wealth, thinking you have money, and you don't have any of that. You just have a house. And so I grew up with that, but he left Motown to become a minister. So what ended up happening is he became the minister of all of the people who were on Motown Records. So they were around our kitchen table, not because they were doing anything music related. My father became their minister. And so he'd have all these Christian entertainment Bible studies. And there'd be hundreds of people in our living room, all entertainers. But they were there for a Bible study.
I mean, this sounds like a book of its own.
Yeah. Oh, someday. Lord knows. But people look at me as the child of a Motown hit maker, and I look at myself as a preacher's kid, because that's all I knew. I didn't know anything else other than being a preacher's kid.
So there was also some friction with your parents.
Sure, because he's a preacher,
and
and I'm a rebel. That don't mix.
So tell me about that. I mean, you left home
mm-hmm.
when you were
15.
Mm-hmm. And really went out on your own and ended up, living, I think, in some homeless shelters mm-hmm. for a while.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the impact that's had on you. I mean, I can't even imagine the stories of, what that experience was like in terms of your career and your path.
Yeah. To me, it was the greatest gift ever, because most people go through life as representatives of themselves. Somewhere along the way, they were either hurt and it caused them to pivot how they present themselves, how they represent themselves, how they show up as themselves, or throughout life they were molded in those earlier years, whether it's in high school, in college, in junior high. So their personality that made them different, that made them unique, that made them special, then they get shaped by the world and told, no, this is how you're supposed to do this. This is how you're supposed to do this. Well, leaving home at 15 years old, I didn't have anybody to tell me this is how you're supposed to do this. So I could simply go off of gut. I could simply go off of this is how I was born to be. And so I've had the unbelievable gift and pleasure of being able to live my entire life showing up exactly as I am, not as a rep of me, showing up as exactly who I am. So when we go back, I'm in the middle of my book tour, of course, and at one of the book tour stops, one of the questions to me from the audience was, what would you go back? Oh, this was Atlanta. What would you go back, and if you could write a letter to your 19-year-old self, what would you say to her? And I said, I would say to her, don't change a thing. Not a single thing. Because I walk through this world with a level of freedom that I've not seen other people experience. And I think it's because I never let the world mold me. I never let it shape me.
I mean, in some ways, you're lucky to be here. I mean, you said that you tried to take your own life a couple times.
Twice, yeah.
Was there someone or a group of people, who helped you through that period?
No, it was just me. And on the other side of it, but that's all I needed. It was me and a whole lot of books. So when people come to me and they say, will you be my mentor? I say, that's a crutch. You don't need a mentor. Let me give you some books you can read. Because so many books, I'd say hundreds of books became my mentor. And reading just the different things from America's Titans, reading things from some of our most brilliant minds and understanding why people come to that place that I came to when I was 20 years old where I tried to commit suicide. That is not abnormal. And so understanding how I got there, why I was there, and then ensuring that from that moment forward, I lived a life that was so purely of purpose and was exactly why I was here on earth, that became my mission at 20. A lot of people don't get that mission until they're in their 50s, 60s, where they decide, you'll talk to people and all of a sudden at 65, 70 years old, they have no filter, right? They just say what's on their mind. Finally, whatever is on their mind is what they say. Well, I've been doing that since I was 20 because on the other side of having tried to commit suicide, I'm like, well, I'm here for a reason. I want to know what that reason is. I'm going to figure it out. And once I figure it out, no one is going to shake me. And so I've had the gift of living that way since I was 20 years old. That's a blessing. And especially as I talk to other people and people ask me for advice, and I realize how much of a gift it was that I learned why I was on earth so soon, so early.
Yeah, from reading the book, you clearly had a strong head on your shoulders and an idea of what you wanted to do in the world. And I think, that also goes to your marriage because you found your husband. You're like, yep, that's the one.
Yeah.
That's the guy that I'm supposed to be with.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to me that he was very much a part of this story as well.
Yeah.
He was kind of there every step of the way. You've written a couple of very successful books about marriage.
Yeah.
In your previous life.
Same life.
Yeah.
I'm about to celebrate 21 years of marriage, and my first book, I began writing it when I was in my 8th year, and I didn't give any personal advice in there. I traveled the world. I interviewed couples happily married 25 years or more to deduce the common denominator. And no matter where in the world I was, there were 12 things that they did similarly. Well, I've now spent from that year 8 until now doing those 12 things. So that book was as much of a help to me as it was to all the people who read it, because I wanted to have a happy marriage, my entire marriage. Like who wants to be in the house with somebody they don't really, really, really like? And so I determined, like day one of my marriage, I was going to really enjoy it. It was going to be a true partnership. And so Keith is throughout this book because I can barely sit and talk to anybody for longer than 5 minutes without mentioning my husband, because we have that type of partnership.
Well, I just love that, he wasn't super in favor of this whole project.
Oh, no,
and
at all.
he said, there's no way in hell we're going to Lynchburg for 5 days, maybe, 3. And then you kind of agreed on 4 or something. But And then once he kind of got there and got into it, he was all in.
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the first things we did when we got there doing research is learn from one of Jack's descendants that the home where this property, the farm where Jack grew up and where he worked as a chore boy and Nearest Green was the master distiller, this 313-acre farm, including the home, including the original stream for Jack Daniel Distillery number 7 and where that originally was, and it was for sale. And so we bought it. We weren't even there for a week before we now are in escrow for this property. And so everything changed once that happened. It was so, I don't like to use the word serendipitous because I don't believe that things just happen. I believe things are orchestrated from a place much bigger than us. And for me, everybody has a different place of where they think it comes from. I think it comes from heaven. And so when we began seeing all these things just roll out in front of us that made no sense, that property had been on the market for 15 months. That is absolutely positively insane. The amount of history in that property, we now have the whole second floor plexiglassed in because one of the rooms, the girls...
Oh, it's like a museum.
It's absolutely like a museum, although we don't use it as such. But there was so much history on the walls from the early 19th century that we literally had to plexiglass it in.
I mean, this is one of the more incredible aspects of this story in terms of how you connected with all of this, how you found this place. I mean, you come to Lynchburg, you've been there for 4 days, you find out that this place is on the market, and it's the farm where Jack Daniel and Nearest Green worked together, spent a lot of time together.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. It's now on the National Registry for historical places.
As it should be.
Yeah, yeah.
So just real quick, tell me, just describe the farm for me. So if you're pulling in the driveway, give me a sense of like the property and what's there.
First of all, we've completely restored it. So that 313 acres now has white picket fence, country fence around the entire thing. And when you come into the gate, the iron gate that we added, you just go up this hill, and it's these rolling hills, and you just keep going up and up and up and up until you come to a two-story home. It is very much so the style of that time, the style of the early 19th century, mid-19th century, and it's this beautiful home. And right when you walk in, to the right is what was a parlor, and that's what I turned into my research room. So I was gathering documents, thousands of documents and original artifacts from around this country for this story. I would bring them into that room. And so the early chapters of the book were written from that property. I was able to walk the grounds and just really feel. And people ask me all the time in walking those grounds, there's a thought that because Nearest Green was an enslaved man and he was on that property, that horrible things happened on that property. And I tell people all the time, listen, I can't walk the grounds of plantations. I can feel my ancestors. I truly can feel their pain. I felt nothing but love and peace as I walked that property. That's why we bought it. If I had felt any level of challenge as I walked that property, any level of hurt and pain other than what we all go through in normal life, I wouldn't have bought the property. It's because I walked the property and there was nothing but peace. And so you can't really account for that in the way that we tell American Southern history. We don't account for the nuance. We don't account for the fact that there were actually white people that were putting their lives on the line for us because they knew it was wrong for us to be enslaved. We have somehow written those people out of the books, or it could just simply be that they were in so much jeopardy themselves that they, for the most part, remained hidden. They weren't exactly writing books about it, right? Because their lives were as much in danger as the black people. If someone was coming to lynch a black person and a white person was protecting that black person, the black person and the white person would be lynched. So that's the nuance part. One of my favorite stories in the book that came through of this research is Lynchburg had created this town, even though they were the county center, which back in that time, basically the county meant the county courthouse was wherever you could get to from wherever you lived during the day on horseback and buggy and get to the court, do your business, and get back home before it was dark. That's how they determined the radius of what was the county courthouse. And so you had all these people coming into this town of Lynchburg in which blacks and whites were treated equally in this town of Lynchburg. But people are coming from outside of this town and they don't feel the same way. And so there was a bit of animosity and hatred toward even Lynchburg, Tennessee, because if you went there, you would see white people and black people walking down the street together. You'd see them having dinner together. That wasn't in most of America at that time. And so you have this really unique story, and I can't really attribute it to anything other than Jack Daniel, the brand, wasn't as big as it is today. But it was big for that time. And he was a big man around town. Well, he always had black men around him that he treated the same as white people. So it's really hard for racists to be in an environment in which the person who you look up to treats black people as the same. And so these are the stories of the South that I think are missing. And I think if we had them, they would give us a little bit more hope about where we are now and where we can also be as a country.
There's an image in the book, or kind of a scene, where you're talking about the relationship between Nearest Green and Jack Daniel. And you said, after long hours at the still, Nearest played his fiddle on the porch and Jack danced.
Yeah.
What a beautiful image that
Yeah.
is. And says so much about their relationship. Where did you get that nugget?
Yeah, that actually comes out of a book called Jack Daniel's Legacy. So there is a white reporter from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, named Ben A. Green. And he came to Lynchburg, Tennessee to write the authoritative biography of Jack Daniel. He came at the behest of Jack's nephew, who Jack had turned the distillery over to. Jack died in 1911, but he turned his distillery over in 1907. He was quite sick. And at the behest of his family, they decided they wanted a biography to be done. But the people who were interviewed for this biography were the people that knew Jack best. It was his friends, his family, people that had worked for him, people that had touched him, his nephew, then his great-nephews. That, too, was being interviewed for this. And in the biography, Nearest Green and his boys are mentioned more times than Jack Daniel's own family. That's a big deal. And if you think about what was happening when that book was published in 1967, if you didn't want to credit an African-American family, you just left them out. No one would have faulted, no one would have said anything. What's so odd about this story, and to me so unbelievably amazing, is that we know who Nearest Green is at all. When you think about every bourbon, and again, I was a bourbon drinker before I began this journey. When you think about every bourbon in this country on a back bar, we don't know who the black distillers were. If that business goes back 150 years, there was a black distiller. But we only know the name of one, Nearest Green. And so that's what I think is so extraordinary about this story, is that Jack and his descendants made sure that we wouldn't be able to erase this family.
Yeah. There's so many different layers to this, and it's so remarkable. And, thinking about Lynchburg, which is a remarkable town also. Yeah. You're coming from California, you come to this place, you don't know anybody, you're getting to know people, then you end up, buying a farm there. Now you've spent a lot of time there.
Yeah.
Tell me about that town and what it feels like to you now. I mean, it seems like it's a very close-knit family. It's almost like everybody's either related or connected or cousins or something.
Absolutely.
So, does it sort of feel like family to you now?
Oh, absolutely. But it did early on. The town of Lynchburg brought me in very quickly, very early on, because almost everyone in some way, shape, or form touches the Green family or touches Jack's family. Now, Jack didn't have any descendants, so there aren't really any Daniels. But his nephew was a Motlow, and so there's a lot of Motlows, and then the Motlows and the Tollies married, and all the rest of that. So there's a lot of Tollies, and so the family. I would like if someone tells me their last name, I can tell them whether or not they have family in Lynchburg, because there's only so many family names in Lynchburg, and everybody is connected in some way, shape, or form. But I had someone tell me when they read the book, they said it feels very much so like a love letter to Lynchburg. And in a certain regard it is, because as an African-American woman, to know that you had a town, there's a story where there's a black man that was being charged with something, but he hadn't yet he hadn't had his due time. And at that time, if a black man was charged, then all of a sudden you'd have these white mobs that would come and decide to carry out their own vigilante justice. And so this sheriff, he guaranteed that this black man would be protected in the jail in Lynchburg. And then this mob came in. The press has now identified, they then prosecuted these people later, but this mob came in from Tullahoma and a nearby city with the absolute intention of lynching this man. And so he's in the jail, and this mob is surrounding the jail, telling the sheriff to release this black man. And the sheriff sounds the alarm. So the whole town of Lynchburg shows up, but the town had burned down previously, and so everyone showed up thinking it was a fire. And they get there and they see this mob. The sheriff's out front with a rifle trying to protect this black man that is inside. And it becomes this all-out brawl in Lynchburg where you have this mob with guns, and you have these people from Lynchburg who didn't know they needed to bring their guns. They all had them, but they didn't know they were necessary. But they literally, that sheriff, to the very last shot, and everybody who had guns to the very last shot, tried to protect this black man. Now, unfortunately, they ended up getting him. But then they all very quickly identified all of those men to the police, and those men were prosecuted. That's not something that you really hear about, because that entire town that really showed up to protect this black man, they were white.
Yeah, that's remarkable, and yeah, not a story that would have turned out that way in a lot of towns in the
Not
South.
at all.
Yeah,
but it did in Lynchburg.
Yeah,
and so as I'm in Lynchburg and just experiencing the warmth of the people that welcomed me in there. And literally from the very beginning, when people learned the story that I was working on, they began trying to help. I would show up, my car would have like a document on it that would help me to tell the story. I have no idea who would drop off the document, or I would get a phone call and say, hey, I have, my wife got some boxes from the courthouse when the court moved or remodeled, and there's a document in here for a mini green. Does that mean anything to you? And I go, yeah, that's Nearest's daughter. I've been trying to look for it. And then they'd welcome me over to their house and for me to go through the documents. And so it's so special to me how the entire town rallied to make sure that this story was told right. Both the African-American community and the white community, which in Lynchburg is not separate.
Right. And you've also mentioned, I think, that a lot of people, black families and white families, share the same last names in a lot of cases.
They do, not for good reasons, though, right? And so this is now going back to days of enslavement. So you do have people that share the same last name almost across the board. If the last name, so Edie started off as white, then it was black. Green was white, then it was black. So you do have a lot of that's there, and that was pretty common. The enslaved people usually took on the last names of their enslavers.
Fawn, the book is called Love and Whiskey. I want to talk about whiskey for a second.
Yes.
So tell me about the whiskey itself, Uncle Nearest, and what makes it special. What kind of process did you go through to get it to where it needed to be?
Yeah, well, first, Uncle Nearest, his great-great-granddaughter, Victoria Edie Butler, is our master blender. She is now 4-time Master Blender of the Year. Our bourbon and Tennessee whiskey, whichever one you want to call it, it's legally both. But Uncle Nearest, our bourbon, Tennessee whiskey, it's the most awarded bourbon in the world 5 years running. And every single year, we rack up so many more awards than everybody else in the industry. And people can't figure out why. I go, listen, whiskey is in Victoria's blood. This is like she was literally, if you've ever seen a person born to do something, it's her blending Uncle Nearest. There is such a legacy. There's such a rich legacy in that. I also think because Nearest Green Distillery in Shelbyville, which is just above Lynchburg, it's an hour south of Nashville, but 20 minutes north of Lynchburg, our distillery is now the 7th most visited distillery in the world. People from every background come and they enjoy the tastings, but also just being on the grounds. They're beautiful 458 acres that we have built out in a pretty stunning way to honor Nearest and everyone who comes there. But the whiskey is extraordinary. And a part of that is because generally with a blender, what distillers do is they proof the whiskey down to 40%, and they're looking for flaws. And it's really a 20 ABV, but a 40 proof. and they taste it by basically putting it in their mouth, chewing it, swishing it around, spitting it out. And then they're what is remaining, they're looking for the flaws. Well, Victoria came in and she didn't know any better. So she began tasting directly from the barrel. And then when people told her, well, you're supposed to just, put it in your mouth, swish it around, spit it out. And she says, well, then how will I know how that tastes going down? Yeah. So how will I know what it tastes like in someone's throat? How will I know if it actually burns once it goes down or if it's more like a warm hug? How will I know that? So she is the only master blender who actually tastes at barrel strength and does not spit out. I think that's the reason why we're the most awarded, is that we actually have someone who is tasting the final product.
It's about 1 o'clock in the afternoon here in Birmingham. So normally I wouldn't be drinking bourbon at this time of day, but right now I kind of wish we had some.
Listen, as soon as you said, let's talk about bourbon, I started looking around the table trying to figure out where the Uncle Nearest was and wondering if I should have brought a bottle, because I have no issue having it at 1 o'clock in the afternoon in Birmingham.
I should have brought some myself next time.
I appreciate that.
So, Fawn, you've always cared a lot about giving back in some way, and one of those ways was the founding of the Nearest Green Foundation. What kind of opportunities do you want to create through that?
Yeah, well, the Nearest Green Foundation, its primary responsibility is paying for the secondary education, so full scholarships for every one of Nearest Green's descendants. Every single semester, we're cutting checks to universities around this country, paying for Green descendants to go to college. What I learned coming into this is Nearest Green and his boys and his grandchildren had such a legacy of excellence in the whiskey business. But most people don't know that Tennessee Prohibition began 10 years before the rest of the country. So 1910, Jack Daniel Distillery left Lynchburg, went to St. Louis. So there was nothing in Lynchburg, Tennessee in terms of an industry, absolutely nothing. You had a few, general stores, a few places that sold ice cream and coffee, but you really had nothing in that entire town from 1910 until the other side of Prohibition. And in Tennessee, Prohibition ended county by county, and Lynchburg was the last county to come out. So you have almost 40 years that Jack Daniel Distillery is not operating in Lynchburg, Tennessee. So all of the branches of Nearest's family left Lynchburg. One went to Indianapolis, one went to St. Louis, one is in Nashville, one is in Tullahoma, one is in Texas. But none of them remained in Lynchburg. So when I began bringing the family together and I was watching the young people, it was very clear they didn't realize they came from a legacy of excellence. They're getting a bunch of D's and F's in school and just kind of just floating through life, if you will, and with not a whole lot of purpose. And so I told the young people, this was before we ever started Uncle Nearest or ever sold our first bottle. I told the young people, I said, listen, if you get into college, I'll pay for it. Just get in. And so now, at that time, those young people, because they weren't really doing what they needed to do to get into top colleges, they could get into community college and work their way up. But that began back in 2016. So now the checks we're cutting are to some of America's top universities. And so that is why the foundation was created, to completely change the trajectory of that lineage. So they returned back to that of their ancestor, which was a legacy of excellence.
That's so great. What a great idea. And I know you're just love being a part of that and seeing kind of the, looking to the future and thinking about what all this is going to do down the road too.
Absolutely.
Well, Fawn, I just have one more question for you, and it has to do with the dedication.
Yes.
You said in the dedication, Uncle Nearest and Uncle Jack, thank you for choosing me as the keeper of this legacy for this leg of the race.
Yes.
Tell me what it means to you to share this story with the world.
Every generation has had a keeper of this story. Even when the story disappeared and people that get the book will learn. I like to give that in full context, but because we are a country that's turned into everyone communicating in 140 characters, and nuanced stories can't be communicated in sound bites. But that piece of it, why it disappeared, is it's important to understand the nuance to it. But every generation has had a keeper of this story to make sure the legacy of Nearest Green never died, to make sure this relationship of love, honor, and respect between Jack Daniel and Nearest Green never went away. And so I just happen to be the keeper of that legacy right now. but I'm only going to be here so long, right? I'll be 48 this year. Knock on wood, I get another 42 years.
You're looking good, Fawn.
I look good. I look good. But I am hopeful that I'll have, another 50 years or so, and I'm able to go at this pace. But when I'm gone, it's very important for this legacy to continue on. And it's very possible that someone else won't have to come after me because now we have Uncle Nearest and we have Nearest Green Distillery. So his story will continue to be told through those two mediums forever. But I do just see this as my leg of the race, as building out Nearest Green Distillery and Uncle Nearest so that this story can never again be forgotten. But I don't pretend that I am the reason that this story is coming to life. I'm shining a light on it, but I absolutely believe that this is Nearest and Jack in heaven, and they're enjoying some whiskey, and they're laughing about it all, and all of the fuss that people are making about it. I absolutely believe it. Without question, I believe it.
And maybe there's some fiddle playing and dancing going on.
It is quite possible. They don't strike me as harp dancing people.
Well, Fawn Weaver, congrats on the book and all your success. And thanks so much for being on Biscuits and Jam.
Thank you for having me. Now, can we actually have Biscuits and Jam?
Let's go to it.
All right.